Hi guys, my name is Chris Mowat, and this will hopefully be the first of many videos that I put together showing how to render in SOLIDWORKS Visualize. Now, I'm going to do this mostly freestyle. I've been thinking for almost years now how to get this type of channel started, and I realized that the best approach is to just go straight at it, right? I have learned a lot in the years that I've spent working for a SOLIDWORKS reseller in Visualize. So I've become an expert in this tool, and it would actually just be therapeutic to dump all this knowledge onto the internet for others to benefit from. So we're going to start this series, if you will, by talking about cameras. So there's a lot of other things like appearances and lighting that go into making a beautiful rendering, but the camera work is always something that people initially have to encounter, and also sometimes it can be a struggle. So hopefully in the few minutes that I have this video today, you'll pick up on some tips that'll make getting started with Visualize, or ramping up your use of Visualize, that much easier. So without further ado, let's get right into the cameras. Right now what I have is one camera called Free. I use this camera sort of as a third-person camera in order to help set up other cameras or just navigate around. What I'm going to do is start off by actually creating a brand new camera. Now I could just duplicate what I have here if I want, but we're actually going to come right over and click on the plus sign. This is going to allow us to create a brand new camera. So we click on New Camera, and you're going to notice that the camera is now active and we're zoomed out from the model. That's okay, we just need to zoom back in. So taking a look, we can see that first of all, the camera is rotating about the center of this board. The board is actually centered on the environment, so this entire area that we're rendering within. But what if you want to focus the camera and pivot the camera more specifically around a particular area of the model? Like right now it's on the center, but what if we want to point it towards the front wheel? Well, we have a tool right here under Camera Tools. You just hover over and come down to the right called Look At. Now Look At stays active the whole time, so we're going to want to turn this tool off as soon as we've used it. We just go ahead and click on where we want the camera to focus. Turn that tool off, but now you'll notice that when I rotate, it's now rotating about this right here. So this will allow me to get that nice view that I want of the tire if that's what I'm going for. Alright, so that's step one, is resetting your focal point, right? Let's put it back to this right here, right? This front area. We can click on the tool again and just use the crosshair to choose that. Turn the tool back off, and now we are focusing right there. So great, we've focused on how we can get the camera to have its focal point in a specific place. Now let's talk about some of the other aspects of cameras that are very useful to know about. So in the Transform tab of your cameras, you've got all of these dials and sliders. Now one thing that I'll also mention is that there's a difference between the sliders and these input boxes. So when we drag this right here, it goes in larger increments. But if we hover over this value and then click, it goes in finer increments. So if you're making small adjustments, just use this technique rather than dragging the slider. Of course, you can just put in the value too. But we can just actually see what happens when I change all these. This is a distance to that focal point. Then we have the longitude property, which basically just rotates the camera. We've got the latitude, and we've got the twist. So this is like you actually twisting your camera from portrait to landscape. Alright, so these are all the options for it, but you can control all this with hotkeys as well. So if you just go ahead and use your mouse like you do for SOLIDWORKS, you can zoom in, you can rotate, you can hold the control key to pan, all of the same types of options that you have in SOLIDWORKS. But we do have a few other things as well. You can come over to the General tab, and you've got Perspective. So let's say we want to get some dramatic perspective on this model. We go ahead and we just change the perspective. So there's this option here. Now it's inverse to a focal length, right? And that's how you can drag things off. And we call that in the art world like a vanishing point, right? Everything sort of just falls into a 0 point in the distance. But that looks pretty good. So that is what's called perspective. Now we're going to hop right into an advanced I'll say it'll make your rendering look advanced, but the tool itself is not very difficult. Let's look at the depth of field. Now this is what I would call a filter, but it's a filter that you do have access to in Visualize Standard. And this will add a whole bunch of realism to your models and a lot of what I call drama. So we'll go ahead and just click on Enable Depth of Field. It immediately gets blurry. That's because we have a focal distance. Now this is going to be the distance to the point that you want to have in focus. So we could go ahead and just slide this and see if we get any better result. Or you can click on Pick, and Pick allows us to, just like our tool for selecting the focal point, we can click right where we want to focus. So I'll click, actually we'll do the tire. Right, so now what we see, and if we zoom in, you'll notice that that focal point has not changed, but our distance has, so this is now back out of focus. Right, but we can come over to Pick, choose the model, and now we've got it nice in focus. Right, I can come in here, do the same thing, pick, click right on here, and now it's nice and in focus. Now, this isn't part of this lesson, but I'm just going to go over to the Scene tab and brighten this up a little bit. It's a little dark in my opinion. Alright, so we'll get back over to the camera after doing that. Now, we're just going to name this camera. This is another common practice with cameras in Visualize, is just to name this. We'll call this Wheel Depth of Field, just for the sake of it. Now, I am interested in some of the properties I've already dialed in here, so rather than create a brand new camera and have to redo some of this work, I'm just going to actually copy-paste it. And Visualize, interestingly enough, has a duplicate function, which is Control-D. So you just select what you want, Control-D, and it automatically splits off a copy. Alright, now if I also am happy with this camera here that I just set up, my wheel degree of freedom, we can click on Locked, and this will make it so I cannot move the model in any way. I'll double click on the other one, okay, and now we can move it because it's a separate camera. You can tell it's active because it's got this green check on it. So we can move around. Sometimes it's a little difficult to move around with the depth of field on because it's constantly keeping a single depth, but you're moving the model further away. So at this point, let's go ahead and just focus on one of the foot straps. Alright, I'll use the same option here and I'll click right on the foot strap. Then I'll turn that off and I'll zoom right in. And let's get nice up and tight on a footrest here. Alright, maybe a little bit more of this perspective, and there we are. A lot of tweaking goes on here. I'm never satisfied. But let's go ahead and turn back on depth of field. Click on Pick and choose our footrest. Now, there's another aspect to depth of field that we haven't covered. Look how this board right here in front is also blurry, and it's blurry in the back. Now, that is your f-stop. So it's the distance to the front and back of your focus point that is still remaining in focus. So if I go ahead and reduce that f-stop, everything is going to now be focused in a much more narrower range. So if we increase the f-stop, you'll notice that things will become more in focus because there's a wider range that we've allowed for that focus. So somewhere in this range looks good to me. We're happy. Now let's get a little extra creative. So all of the stuff that we've done up to this point is all done in Visualize Standard. But let's now look at some of the filter options that you have only in Visualize Pro. Okay, I want to be clear about that, but some of the things here you can definitely do in a secondary program after you've rendered this out. So first thing we'll look at is bloom. Keep it simple, right down here at the bottom. It's called Enable Bloom. And what this will do is it'll actually produce a bright halo around all of the shiny areas or the brightest areas in the rendering. Now, I actually do not care about the background being blurry here at all. That's not what I wanted. So we can go ahead and change intensity levels and a radius, and you'll start to see that update. You also have an intensity slider, so if it's all the way down, anything that's mildly reflective is going to start having a halo. And then when we go the opposite direction, it's sort of a judgment of what's brightest, right? And it will start just illuminating or adding that halo blur effect to the most bright objects. So So this looks pretty good. Now it's very faint, but there is a slight blur, or I should say bloom to this. It adds that extra bit of realism. Now let's look at this option up here. This will be the final thing we cover in today's video, enable post-processing. So these are called post-processing filters, and you've got a couple options here. You've got apply to geometry only, or apply to essentially everything. We're going to apply it to everything, so that when we change these filters, it also changes the backdrop color, right? Now, if we look, we can change things like vignette. Vignette is more of that like old sort of photo that narrows down from a focal area of a dark outline. We've got darken. Darken will go ahead and darken the most dark areas of the model. I'm not really interested in that. You've also got lighten. So lighten will draw out more brightness from the lighter areas of the model. That actually looks kind of cool because it's making that green pop, right? I actually do like that. But lighting and darkening is different than saturation. So saturation is the degree of color saturation in the rendering. So if I turn this all the way up, you'll see that this turns into a crazy neon, and all the way down we start to get that black and white, or full black and white color. Now this can certainly add some realism when you hide the color, but I like, again, where this is really a nice color that pops, so let's keep it right in this range here. You can mess around with exposure, see how that benefits or goes against, the style you were looking to achieve. I'll just kind of keep it in that range. Gamma, same thing. Not really worth adjusting so much. You can, I just find it to be happy right in the middle there. So we'll undo a few times. Go right there. And then finally, there's overall brightness. So this is like the overall brightness of the image. We can drag that down a little bit. Now another aspect of this, probably the last one, is the color filter. So if you want to add a warm color filter to this, you could choose something in the yellow range, and you'll see that get applied and overlaid. Alright. You can start to see it getting warm. Right. And now we'll go ahead and change that though. We can change that to a cooler color, somewhere in the blue range. And now I'm noticing one thing, because this is all bright and white. What we're going to do is finish up by just hiding the scene. So we have the environment showing. I'm going to click on color. And color just makes it so there's no actual background to the image. So after having done all this, this is looking pretty cool. We can go back to our cameras and see that we've got wheel DOF. We'll call this foot strap, or binding. We'll call this filters. Alright, go ahead and lock that too. Now we can go and we can switch between our cameras. Alright, let that other one activate. It takes a second. And it looks pretty cool. So thank you. We've gone through setting up these cameras and adding some of those filters. We've distinguished what you can do in Visualize Standard from what can be done in Pro. Hopefully some of these tools you can use right away to increase the quality of your renderings. Thank you, and I'll see you again soon.